George Lyon, Liberal Democrats MEP for Scotland. What is this threat that you're warning of for the Scottish beef industry?
Well, within the next 2 or 3 weeks, the European Union is going to offer to Brazil extra access to its cheap beef imports into the European market. And I am deeply concerned that if the offer is unfettered and has no protection for the quality beef industry, the Scottish beef industry could be fatally undermined. We produce quality beef at the very top end of the marketplace, but we can't compete on price with cheap Brazilian imports. Therefore, if this came about and the beef industry was damaged, it would be damaging for the environment, it would be damaging for local communities because of a big loss of jobs, and it would be damaging for the natural landscape of Scotland because beef cattle shape that landscape and make sure it looks as wonderful as it does. So I'm calling on the Commission to make sure that they recognise the real concerns that are in Scotland about this proposal.
And these imports potentially that you're talking about, I mean, is this beef that is produced not to the same standards that those farmers you're talking about in Scotland have to adhere to?
Yeah, we have very, very high quality standards in Scotland, both legislative standards, legal standards on health, on welfare and environment, but we also have added higher standards that we put in place ourselves to make sure our beef is sold onto the very top end of the marketplace. And the real worry is that if a whole flood of cheap imports come into the country, it could destroy that industry.
And what is the trade deal and why are you concerned that this might happen? What's giving you reason to suspect that this might be the case?
Well, Commissioner de Gucht told us last week that they were within weeks of making an offer to Brazil and Argentina. And I think there's a bit of the Commission, one hand not knowing what the other's doing, because on the one hand we have Commissioner Scholes, who's setting out a reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, and one of the key priorities is to make sure that local food production still continues in those areas that are disadvantaged, such as the majority of Scotland. On the other hand, the Trade Commissioner is threatening to let in a huge amount of cheap imports which could destroy that objective. So we need some joined up thinking in the Commission to realise that yes, we can do a trade deal with Brazil and Argentina, but there must not be unfettered access. They must realise that they could have a devastating effect, not only in Scotland but other areas around Europe that produce top quality beef.
I mean, what would the impact be if your fears actually become reality? Could we potentially see some of these beef farmers in Scotland going out of business? Would jobs be lost? What could be the scale of the impact, really?
Well, clearly, yes. If you can't compete, then the specialist suckler herd will disappear out of Scotland. Big job losses and land abandonment across much of Scotland, because the beef industry is the core of the agricultural industry in Scotland. And of course, then you don't have the raw material for all the added value down the food chain, because we're big exporters of beef, not only to the United Kingdom but around Europe. So huge potential for job losses and damage to the environment. So I just hope that the Commissioner, whom I hope to meet in the next week or two, will take account of that in trying to draw up some sort of offer to Brazil and Argentina.
And what kind of impact would that have, the impact on the farms then have on the wider sort of local community in those, particularly the rural parts of Scotland?
Well, the beef industry is a big player in rural Scotland. It creates jobs through the haulage industry, through the service industry that services it, and there's huge numbers of jobs tied up in the further processing of beef in Scotland. The northeast of Scotland is dominated by a large number of processors who process Scottish beef and sell it on to Tesco's, etc. So all of that food chain is at risk if this goes wrong, and I am going to impress the Commissioner. We need to make sure we don't get it wrong.
I mean, what would satisfy you, if you like? What are you going to be asking the Commissioner for? What kind of safeguards would protect the industry?
Well, I think the first safeguard is to make sure that any offer made gives offers protection to the specialist beef sector. I think if there's offers made to Brazil and Argentina that cheap manufacturing beef might be let in, I think I could possibly live with that. But the last thing we need is top quality beef being allowed in that competes head on with the Scottish beef industry. Otherwise, I don't think we will have much of a future.